What's up, guys? Sean here. Well, you know, if I'm honest, probably my favorite Spyderco right now has got to be the K390 Police. This steel's just a total fucking M4 killer, you know. I feel like there's probably no reason to ever buy an M4 knife in a Spyderco, just because the K390 will do everything you want better. You know, it takes a really, really nice fucking edge, holds it longer, it's just as tough, it seems, at the edge. Now, technically, M4 would be tougher because it has less stuff inside of it. The thing is that K390 has more strength. You know, they heat treat this guy pretty hard, and all the edge toughness I'm seeing from the past year of use, you know, almost going on a year and a half of use with this guy, oh, it's fucking phenomenal. You know, it takes just a smoking edge, man. I really like this stuff a lot. So I think if I had to narrow it down to one Spyderco and one steel that Spyderco uses that's the best, it's the K390. Hands down. You know, people's next question is always, is it stainless? I need a stainless blade, you know? You know, it's not a stainless steel. It's a carbon PM tool steel. And a lot of the benefits and attributes that that gives you is what you just saw. Just a nice blend of high strength and good amounts of edge toughness. Okay, so adding chromium to this steel would actually kind of reduce that performance. All right, there's just not really any steels on the market currently that really have maximized the carbon chromium balance for optimal hardness and toughness. So right now, this is kind of what you have to deal with in order to get the most performance. But the thing is it doesn't rust as readily as something like 52100. 52100 is a lot more prone to rust. This guy, it just seems like it just gets like a patina. You just use it, you don't oil the blade or anything like that, you just keep it dry, and you just wipe off any, liquid or any of that stuff, and some things it'll react with and put this kind of bluish, copperish hue patina on there with use, which, you can patina the blade more too if you'd like, but it doesn't rust or react as readily as something like 52100. Now, if you get rust or anything on this blade, you just use barkeeper's friend. You sprinkle it on the blade, and you just basically wipe it off. Give it a little scrub with a Brillo pad. That's the fastest way to clean off rust, not flitz. Flitz is more of a polishing compound. That's not really the best thing for this. I would use something like barkeeper's friend. Thought I'd get us a close-up of the tip here on this K390 steel. And you can see no chipping. Some slight blunting at the tippy tip. Not really much noticeable, but it's definitely not as sharp as it was before this test started. But yeah, K390 has plenty of edge toughness. At the edge itself has plenty of toughness. Now, this blade steel is not going to be the toughest blade steel. In fact, it's going to be one of the more least tougher steels. But what it offers is strength, okay? It has a lot of strength. It's not like CPM4V, where CPM4V has a blend of strength and toughness. This drops the toughness some for some strength, which is actually really, really important when it comes to manifesting itself at the edge, okay? That's why that's so important. So this stuff operates at high working hardnesses, just like the Venatus 4 Extra, the CPM 4V, as well as the 10V. It's essentially like a 10V class steel. But it just goes to show that there really is no reason to use M4 in a blade anymore. You know, if you have access to steels like this is just a total M4 killer. Now, when it comes to toughness, people think about durability in all aspects, but there's different kinds of toughness, you know what I mean? And the certain kinds of toughnesses we would use for a small folding knife aren't the same as the certain kinds of toughness we would use for a big chopping knife. So they don't really cross over like people think. So this geometry behind the edge thickness is fairly thick, so it can actually handle a pretty decent amount of punishment. Now, the distal taper is thin, so people confuse this for being a super slicing type knife. Not really, you know. While that is thin, and while I'm not saying that you can't break this, I mean, okay, you could totally break this knife, all right? And I'm not saying that, K390 means that with this geometry you can, fucking twist out and shit like that. I mean, you could probably totally just break the tip doing stupid shit like this, all right? But who does that with their fucking knife? Who does that shit? Seriously, stop doing that if you do that, because that's not what your good knife is for. Don't pry shit with that. You can use some cheap piece of steel to pry stuff with. Okay, there's nothing fancy about being able to pry stuff with, but if you want to maximize how this edge holds, then you have to make the steel overall inherently more brittle, when it comes to actually lateral toughness kind of stuff, flexing the blade. This steel's not going to be as shock resistant. If we were going to try to chop this bolt, it'd be more likely to break. Even though chopping a bolt does rely on having some amounts of strength or whatnot, having a steel that's tougher, that accentuates the toughness to really get through the bolt without breaking, unfortunately the edge holding, takes a nosedive. It takes a nosedive to have something more shock resistant, because what happens is shock resistance is the ability for the steel to move when stressed. Having a lot of strength means that it doesn't really move, and when it reaches its kind of critical point, it just breaks. So the idea is that you don't really want a shock resistant steel on a nice cutting knife, because the edge will just fucking fold over all day when you're just trying to cut, and you're going to have to sharpen all the time, versus this right here, while it's technically not as tough, the edge itself, having that nice combination of strength and toughness, in day-to-day use, you're going to be just fine with this guy if you don't use it like a dummy. And if you accidentally hit like a staple and shit like that, you're going to be A-okay, man. You're going to be fine, okay? So, K390, it's one of the top dog steels. Now, when it comes to my custom knives that I make in this, I maximize the cutting performance. I make it much, much thinner. So I would never think to stab and hit stuff like this, because I want to make the knife cut better. And in order to make the knife cut better, you got to go thin, 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 which means you have to use it more like a knife, but you're rewarded with more performance. It'll cut longer than this just based off the geometry alone. Okay, so that's the idea. That's why you should go thinner and use your knife better, and not have a knife that's made to do stuff like this. That's just silly. All right? Cool. So I have a little bear here, and this is also in K390 at 6566 HRC with a special fucking awesome heat treat. The geometry on this guy is fucking insane. It's about 5 thou behind the edge, 15 degrees per side. It has a sheath here. It's not going to stab the brick like this knife is, just because of the geometry of this guy, but this is going to cut way better, because realistically a knife is not meant to stab a brick and stuff like that. I'm just kind of going to show you guys a point here, that while K390 itself is not the toughest steel, we've got enough geometry on this guy to be fairly tough. Now, if you pry on this guy, I'm sure you could break it, no doubt. I'm not saying it's indestructible, but I'm saying that K390, with the geometry that you get on a production knife, oh, it's got plenty toughness. There's no reason to really use M4, I feel. But I like to take the steel, like K390, and synergize it, maximize it, and get the thinnest geometry possible. Really, really hard steel, excellent heat treat, and fuck, yeah, this stuff right here is probably one of my top favorite steels. That's bone paper micarta. We got to buff up this copper a lot more here. But yeah, it's looking good. This is what it'll look like with use. You'll get kind of a patina on the copper. I like this knife so much I was almost considering not selling it, just because it's so badass. But yeah, cool. So K390, one of the top dog steels, man.